Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
I really think that a lot of us have a new appreciation of books. Like, books are back. And I'll tell you, I was at the gym the other day and there was somebody 2 treadmills down, and she couldn't have been more than, I'd say maybe 30, 35. And she's physically reading a paper book while on the treadmill at the gym. And I was just like, wow.
I don't think I could do that.
I don't know that I could, but she looked like she was fine. She wasn't jogging, she was walking, but definitely reading a book. And I thought it was super cool. And
it wasn't my book by any chance, was it?
I didn't want to get too creepy close, if that's okay.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
But I did think of you, and I was thinking, hey, by the way, you want to hear about a couple of good books? He's award-winning author Larry Deiman, who joins us. And how's everything going, Larry?
Good, great.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on now. You've got 2 awesome books. You're working on your 3rd one. And why don't we, and we've talked about this before, but why don't we kind of, for people that haven't heard about the 2 books, let's go into a little detail on them, the background, the adventures between Trevor and Jason.
Sure. My first book, Incident at the Historical Museum, is all 3 books are loosely based on myself, along with my one of my best friends. And when I started with book 1, the intent was to kind of define the characters. So I defined the characters. Our 2 main characters are Jason and Trevor. Trevor is loosely fashioned after me. Jason is loosely fashioned after my friend. And what I did when I started the book is I wanted to introduce the characters as real people, and that's what I've done as far as making them have the background that we have, or more specifically that Jason had, or that my friend has. I'm more in the book. Trevor is more like me, where he's not defined as a specific background in the book, but he's more who I want to be, or who I would have preferred to be at that age. I mean, I don't really go into detail as to their ages in the books, but I put Jason and Trevor probably in the low to mid 30s in age. For me, that would be about 30 years ago. So back when I was that age, there were things that I wanted to do that I never did because I wanted to be safe in a safe job. Trevor, when I built Trevor is more that go-getter that takes a risk, that kind of throws it all to the wind and hopes that everything works out fine. And of course, because he's the star of the book, it does, And Jason, he starts out with more of a troubled past because of things that were going on in his life. But he's into security. He loves security. He doesn't know a lot about a lot of things, but he knows security. And he starts off in the book talking about losing a job that he loved, which was working as an operations manager for a security company. He lost that job, and that's kind of where the book begins. The book starts off with actually with Trevor, with a woman that he met the night before. And then we kind of go right into Trevor's career and what he's doing. And then we talk about Jason and what Jason's doing. Okay. And then of course there are other characters that are introduced at the time, like Jeanette, who is a high-priced hooker who comes in, at the beginning of the book and kind of woos Jason and gets Jason to ask her out, and one thing leads to another, and those 2 kind of hook up later on. And there's some pretty steamy scenes with the 2 of them in the first book.
So I want to jump into that for a moment.
Yeah, please.
That was a setup from his friend. What was his intention? Was it just a
one-night stand? Was what it was supposed to be.
Why did he do it? Was he feeling that his friend was lonely? Did he just want to, pull a prank on him? What was it?
Well, no, it was more, Jason was feeling depressed and worthless because he lost this great job that he was so good at. And he was feeling pretty vulnerable. So Trevor wanted to give him a night to remember, just kind of as a gesture. That wasn't a prank. It was from the heart. He wanted to get this guy to forget what had just happened to him, at least for a night. And so what he did was he hired this high price hooker. The idea was that she was supposed to just make sure that he noticed her in the first, we're talking the first couple of chapters. We wanted him to notice her, and she made overtures to make sure that he did. And the way I wrote it was that Jeanette was not allowed to tell Jason what it was she did for a living. That it was supposed to be like a random boy meets girl type thing in a bar. And one thing leads to another, and before you know it, Jason and Jeanette are having a great old time in the sack and start to fall in love. You know, he asks her out on a date. She's more, I don't know if I really want to do this because she's a hooker and she doesn't really want to get tied down, but she really likes Jason too. So one thing leads to another, and before you know it, the two of them are dating.
So was Trevor thinking of divulging this in a timely fashion, or was he? What was his plan? Though that's what I get that he was trying to help his friend out, make his friend Jason feel better, but was he thinking the next day to say, hey, by the way, just want to let you know that never was going to tell him and figure it was a one-off, and then she would be,
exactly.
Very
he would have mad sex with her that night, and that would be the end of it. I mean, that's what hookers do. He had no intentions of telling Jason, hey, by the way, that chick that you really liked last night is a high price hooker. It never occurred to Trevor that this was going to go on, and he really didn't know that they were seeing each other until several chapters later, when Jason kind of lets Trevor know, well, we've been kind of seeing each other, sort of, and then, later on, Jason wants to marry Jeanette. Jeanette kind of puts the brakes on it and says, I know what you're going to ask. Can you just hold that thought for a few days, because she wanted to talk to Trevor, because at this point they've been dating for all this time, and she's never revealed to him what it is that she does for a living. Not that he would approve or disapprove, but they're dating, and now that they've been dating for a while, and it's kind of getting awkward for her to jump in and say, oh, by the way, to Jason.
Yeah, we're past that. It's like,
yeah, we're a little past that part of it. And he's asked her to, a few times in those few chapters what it is that she does, and her pat answer is that she's in customer service. Well, yeah, that would be accurate, but very loose kind of way. But so when she knows that Jason takes her to this fancy restaurant, and just the way he's acting, she has this feeling he's going to ask her to marry him. And that's when she puts on the brakes and says, before you do that, I do want to marry you, but before you do that, I need more time. So don't ask right now, but please ask me down the road, And so he kind of becomes standoffish after that. And so, because he thinks that, well, she's putting, she doesn't want to marry him.
Yeah.
Even though she says she does, she doesn't. Why wouldn't she? If she wanted to marry him, why wouldn't she just say yes, or let him ask? So she goes and she decides she's going to call Trevor. And how do I do that? How do I deal with this, Trevor? Well, Trevor gets a little pissed off on that, because he's, what do you mean he wants to marry you? This was supposed to be a one-time thing. What are you doing? And why have you not told him? If you wanted to date this guy, that's great, but why have you not told him? Like on date 2, why have you not told him? So he gets a little pissy about that. And she kind of explains it like, well, one thing led to another, and I really didn't want to rock the boat, and wasn't sure how he would feel about that. And instead of just excuses. So she kind of cons Trevor into telling Jason what she does for a living. Well, it was right after that. Not that that wasn't planned, but right after that, Jason or Trevor ends up going to Quantico for FBI training. So he's gone for 22 weeks. So when he comes back, he's deep in with the FBI. He's working with the FBI. He's got a case handler. He's got things that he's doing, and he really doesn't have time to be going to Jason. And he had a couple of chances, and it didn't work out because of things that Jason said. He just didn't want to, rock the boat or piss him off the day after he got back from Quantico. So he never actually ends up telling him until just before his wedding, which I assure you did not go well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And that's the great part about books, where you can put yourself in that situation. And how would you handle it? Like, how would you feel if you were Jason and the person now that you love, that you're planning on spending your life with, somehow it gets revealed that they have a line of work that you might
may not approve with.
Yeah, exactly. Oof. Wow.
Yeah. And it's a huge blow up between Jason and Trevor. So, I mean, they patch things up. I mean, it's, Jason doesn't really blame Trevor, but he does get kind of physical with Trevor when Trevor reveals what it is. And he's screaming and yelling, and, he gets really upset, and he goes flying into where Jeanette is sitting and blows up at her. And, one thing leads to another, and they're just, like this, power struggle is like, Jason's just frustrated because he's like, what do you mean she's a freaking hooker? And just keeps on, I mean, it's just, it wasn't a good scene, trust me. But I'm not even going to reveal too much, because that is more towards the end of the book. And I don't want to it's not the main storyline, but it is a storyline nonetheless. And it does have an ending. I'm not going to say how that ending comes about, but I will say it is part of an ending to that storyline in the book.
Would they? I don't want to give up too much here, but they do make it to the altar at some point.
Yes, they do.
But we're not going to say anything more.
No, no. How they got there and when they got there, we're not going to talk about. But they do eventually get to the altar, but it took a lot to get there. A lot of crying, a lot of yelling and screaming, and And I can tell you that Trevor makes a comment in one of the final chapters that says, you do know that, you actually assaulted a federal officer. That's a federal offense, felony. He's just kind of joking with Jason, but that's as far as I'm going to go with that story.
And I could jump in with a sneaky way of saying, by book 2, is this woman covered under Jason's insurance? The sneaky way.
Yeah, I would say so. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I can reveal that there are 2 storylines in book 2. One of the storylines is devoted almost entirely to Jeanette.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, and I don't want to say any more either. You already gave up a little bit with my silly question. That was a slap.
Yeah. So I guess it's I mean, halfway through the book, he does want to book 1, he does want to marry her, and they do end up to the altar. How they get there and what happens leading up to that, I'll leave that to the reader to buy the book and find out for sure. But there is in book 2, they are married, and there are things that are going on between the 2 of them, and then with Jeanette by herself. We learn more about Jeanette's family in book 2. In book 1, they're introduced, but in book 2, they're more prominent in her storyline. Again, it's not the main storyline, but it is a storyline. You can't, when you're writing a book like this, you can't have one solid storyline and that's it. There have to be other scenarios going on around them to make the book interesting, So, I mean, the book wouldn't be half as long as it is if I had just the one storyline. But and there are things that happen back in DC because book two is centered more in the small town in North Texas. So there are things that are still happening in DC because that's where they're from. That's where their base is. A lot of things are happening back in DC that make up a lot of the action in some of these chapters. There's action in almost every chapter, not every chapter, but almost every chapter. And a lot of, and some of that, I won't say a lot of that, but some of that action is back in Minneapolis, in DC, sorry, in Washington, DC.
Minneapolis is book 3. We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, we haven't got there yet. Sorry.
What's interesting? What's interesting, Larry, when you talk about the different plot lines or different things going on, that's life. Like, we're not just here talking, and this is the only thing going on. In your life, there's something floating out here. You've got this happening. Same thing with me. I've got this later. That's going on. That's happening at the same time. So really, just a copy of what happens in life in general. We do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is from Laura in Spokane, and you can reach us instant feedback, steve@gmail.com. She says, I'm writing my first book and I have a question. How do you know when it's time to move to the next scene or chapter?
Well, what I did in my books, that's when you have multiple storylines. You should have one main storyline that's going to follow all the way through the end of the book. But what I did was I had these small, what I would call supplemental storylines going with different characters in the book. What I did was in book 1, well, more in book 1 than book 2, but what I did was every other chapter would be a part of the different storyline. So every other chapter would be a storyline. Every other chapter from that would be also a storyline. And one of them is the main storyline. So you want to be able to have different things going on in different chapters, but you want to stay focused on whatever your main storyline is. So what I did was I just made sure that I had storylines that can intersect as well as be separate from the main storyline. And then when you get to a new chapter, you jump to one of those other storylines. Gotcha. That way you're not going straight through on one storyline. This allows you to be able to, well, first of all, have more chapters and also make the book more interesting because you're going to direct their attention away from the main storyline momentarily. Now, in book 2, there were several sections of the book where, like say chapter 2 and 3, and I'm not saying that there is, but where like say chapter 2 and chapter 3 are from the same storyline, and then chapter 4 might be for the other storyline, But I tried to make them every other chapter so that in book 2, the main storyline is in Texas. So chapter 2 may be in Texas, and then in chapter 3 we'll jump back to see what's going on back in DC. Because we've still got Jason's business there. Things are happening at Jason's business with his ex-partner that is now in prison. So there are things that are happening back in DC that are unrelated to the main storyline. So what you do is you go in and you find some other focus in the book that you can bounce back and forth to. And for me, it was a different storyline, and different characters.
So I wonder, I've always heard leave them wanting more. So how do you know, for lack of a better description, that you're beating a dead horse? Like when you get to, certain points, like, am I spending too much time on this? Do you go with your gut? Do you have a certain feeling? Do you read it over and over again and just say to yourself, yeah, it still seems fresh, and this is about the point where I should end this situation?
Yeah, it's more a gut instinct. When I get to a certain part of the book or a certain chapter, I might say, okay, I beat that down. That's enough of that, and I'll go on to something else. So even though my story is my book is the main storyline. Canyon Springs Wash, Texas has a lot of things going on. That's where the main storyline is. So what I'll do is I might change gears, or I might add a new twist. I'm noted for my twists.
Okay.
I might have a new twist that takes it off in a different direction that you didn't expect. But then it comes back to it's all part of the same storyline, but it eventually comes back to where I was before. It's just like something happened. I did that in book 2, where something happens to one of the team members that was unexpected. It was totally out of the storyline. It's completely out there in left field, and I threw that in, and I just made it all work, and it came out brilliantly, if I might say so myself. The way I got it, the way I did it, I'm not going to say, because that's an integral part of the storyline, but I'm going to say that I did put a couple of twists and turns in there that take you off the storyline, the main storyline, into a different direction momentarily, just to kind of refresh things and bring you back eventually. So in one chapter, something happens that in book 2, for example, something happens that is completely off the storyline, but then the next chapter comes back to it, and they decide what they're going to do from there moving forward.
So now you revealed last time we talked that you have a file that off to the side, and it's just ideas. If idea pops in your head, I might use that sometime. And you put it in the file.
Yep.
How often do you go back to that? Is it a lot of just, I don't mean this in a bad way. Is it a lot of dead ideas that you throw in there, and every once in a while there's a little nugget? You're like, that one's good. I'm going to use that. Yeah.
That's actually pretty accurate. I put a lot of ideas down on paper, and if I'm stuck on a section of the book where I'm not really sure where I want to go from there, I'll go back to my notes and I'll kind of run through them, and oh, hey, that might work, and you pull something out of the dead file. And truth be told, I called that file my dead file, because it's ideas that I may or may not use in my book, but it's ideas that I've already thought of and maybe discarded. But now, I think I've mentioned this before, that I don't always don't always stick to the main storyline and keep it going without a twist or turn about it. So what I'll do is I might think, oh my God, this is getting boring. So I'll put something, I'll go back to my notes, and I'll find something that I can throw in that's going to make it a little more interesting. Add to the storyline. And like I did with this one chapter, throw something in there that's completely off the main storyline just for a chapter. And it kind of brings you right back to that, and it kind of refreshes the storyline.
How often do you deeply edit? At what point? So let's fast forward to book 3. What chapter are you up to now? Is it 10?
12.
You're up to 12. Okay. When you're there, you wrote chapter 10, 11, working on 12. Do you go back and edit, or you wait till the whole?
Wait till the end.
Okay.
I'll do editing. Like when I do a chapter, I may do a chapter or 2, and then I have a full-time job, so I may go off of it for a couple of days and come back to it. Well, what I do is I always go back at least a couple of chapters to see where I was, refresh my memory on what I've done up to that point. And then at that point, I might re-edit something that I put in a previous chapter, but I only go back a couple of chapters at a time, so I'm writing chapter 12. When I started chapter 12, I kind of took a break for a couple of days because I had some couple of busy days in there on my personal life. So I took a couple of days off, and I had to come back to it. So I read chapter 10 and 11 to see where I was going with this. And then oh, okay, that's where I was. Well, I made some edits of chapter 11 that changed how chapter 12 ended up. only because I didn't think of a different direction. I just thought of a different platitude in the book that brought me back to something I had thought of earlier but discarded. And I might come back to it and say, well, that will actually work now. It's kind of like what I was saying before, where on book one, I wrote the ending of the book before I even got halfway through the book, because I kind of knew where I wanted the book to end, but I still needed to get there. So I'm on like chapter 12 and I'm already writing chapter 24, 25. But by the time I got to 24, 25, actually getting from chapter to chapter, when I got to 24, I just completely changed my mind on how I wanted to do that. So I ended up with a complete twist at the end of book one that nobody expected.
It must have been so gratifying, even for that moment, to put the last chapter down, even though you had so many chapters to get to, but just wow, this is how it's going to end. Of course, it changed, but it must have been a feeling.
It was a good feeling to know that I've now got basically a goal in mind. I'm halfway through the book and this is where I'm going to end up. Now, I did kind of sort of end up there, but I did change a lot of the end of the book to add some twists and turns in the end of the book. So I changed the final ending isn't exactly how I wrote the final ending when I was in chapter 12, but it was close. But that's one of the benefits of writing, because I can think ahead to where I want to go. Like in book 3, I know where my ending is going to go, but I just got to get there. I'm only halfway through the book, so I got a long way to go.
They shoot everything out of sequence anyway, and then they put it together.
And then they kind of put it all together. It's like a big puzzle. They put it all together, and somehow it comes out to a great movie on the big screen.
By the way, I just want to tell everybody, we're talking with award-winning author Larry Deiman, and he's got 2 books out. You can go to the website, trevorsadventure.com. Oh, do I have that right?
Yes.
I'm second guessing it for a second.
It's www.trevorsadventure.com. Trevor's is plural, adventure is singular. So it's trevorsadventure.com.
You can learn more about the books on the website. You can also buy them. They're on Amazon.com. So I think about this. If you haven't worked on the book in a while, do you feel almost guilty, like you haven't fed the baby?
Yeah, actually I do. Especially if I've got ideas that I want to put into the book. Things that I've thought of, because I'm always thinking about my next book and what I can put in, and I'm thinking about the storyline, and this storyline has become very complex, as I've been working through it. And I feel guilty when I'm not, I think of an idea like on Monday, and it's like Wednesday when I finally sit down and write, and by the time I got to Wednesday, I may have changed that idea a little bit, but I've added to it, and I do feel guilty when I'm not writing all the time, because this is what I want to do for my full-time job. It's not my full-time job. I wish it was, but this is what I want to do. And so I'm always thinking about that next chapter. And
have you
get there eventually.
Yeah, I wonder, and I love the writing process, and thank you for letting us like peel the curtain back and learn more about how this is all done. But have you ever, let's say on a Monday, I got an idea, this is going to be good, can't wait, but you were too busy, life gets in the way, I have a job. Now it's Wednesday, and have you ever sat down and was like, all right, and then it's like, I just don't have I don't have what I was feeling on Monday to put the oomph into it on Wednesday. I'll get it back. I will at some point, but it just, the steam or the wind came out of the sail for the moment for that idea. And the idea is the same in your head, but when you've got this, I'm going to attack this baby right now, it presents itself in a different way, right?
It does. In fact, there are many times throughout the writing of these books that when I come back to it a couple of days later, even a week later, and I'm sitting down and I'm ready to write it, it's like, oh, Larry, what the hell were you thinking? That's not going to work, And then I go off in a whole different way, and then maybe that idea is more appealing down the road, maybe in a different chapter, you know. And I did that with book one. I was halfway through the book and I had this great idea, and then I thought, it just doesn't work for me now, you know. And that's a lot of, when you're writing a book, it's especially fiction. It's a lot of what you're writing is our ideas, you know, our ideas that you have, and it may stem from real life. Like I've interjected a lot of my real life into these books because that's what makes it human. You know, that's what makes Trevor human. You know, and when I get to that point, I think to myself, do I really want to do that? You know, do I want to put him through this? But if I don't put him through this, then this down the road won't work. So you kind of gotta weigh the checks and balances on the storyline and what you want to do with it. I mean, I had an idea of a storyline when I started book 3. I knew exactly what I wanted for the storyline, but now that I'm writing the book, it's like some of the ideas I had just don't seem to work. So that's, you know, it's kind of like the hazards of writing a book. You know, I think you said it early on that writing a book is like a blank canvas or like a blank canvas. You can go in and you can start writing your book and you can change it willy-nilly however you want it. The idea is to have a story at the end of the book, you know, and I've done that successfully on the first 2 books.
Yep.
But I can't say that it was always that easy to get to it.
Well,
you know,
I can't even imagine Larry starting a book. You know,
Yeah.
like you're starting at zero, so to speak, and
Yeah.
now you have to establish the characters. And like momentous responsibility. I have to establish these 2 characters. I've got to put them in situations. I've got to keep moving it along. It is my first book. I've never written one before, so I understand. I think you said it took you like 3 years. Totally, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, what a responsibility not only to the reader but to yourself, because you have a goal and now you got to get to that goal. And that's
Exactly.
But then once the first one is done, it's almost like, you know, you're not the virgin anymore. So now
Exactly.
you know,
When I wrote book 2, it took me 6 months, you know, and that's because I had this idea in my head for book 2, and it rolls from book 1 because the epilogue for book 1 rolls into the prologue of book 2, and it kind of sets the stage for book 2, you know. And when I was writing book 2, well, I mean, one of the benefits of the pandemic was that I was able to really spend a lot more time working on the book than I did on the first book, because we were all kind of homebound during the pandemic. It was right after, I mean, when I started writing book 2, it was right after my company sent us home permanently to work from home. So we were all homebound, you know. So you get tired of watching TV after a while. So it took me 6 months to write the second book. And to be honest with you, I didn't make a lot of changes. When I read it through for the first time after I finished writing the book, I didn't have nearly as many changes as I thought I would. It was, I mean, I made changes, but nothing substantial. There were more superficial changes than there were anything. And my characters, I mean, a lot of my characters from book 1 moved over to book 2, you know. And there's a lot of different activities for those characters in book 2. You know, book 1 is kind of like, as you put it, you said it yourself, it was more introducing those characters and introducing what they're doing and what they're capable of. And then in book 2, I allow them the opportunity to be able to express a lot of that, you know. And book 2's got a lot of action in it. It's a fun book to read. I think it's a fun book to read because there's so much going on, you know, and every chapter has some excitement going on, you know, and it's fun to read, I think.
You don't have to answer this question.
Okay.
Which do you like better, book 1 or book 2? It's almost, you know what, before you even answer, it's almost like, back to the baby analogy, it's almost like, you got a favorite kid?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my first book is always going to have a special spot in my heart because that was my first book. Gotcha. I mean, when I was writing book 1, I had no idea I could do this. You know, I mean, I had an idea, But to put this idea in 25 chapters, it's like, oh God, Larry, you must be out of your mind, you know? And then I sat down and I started writing, and it's like, maybe I can do this. And then halfway through the book, you know, it's like, oh, I can't do this. I just can't do this. But then I keep on going, you know, and eventually it turns into a book. And it actually turns into a book that I'm very proud of, because it conveyed a lot of my thoughts in that book. I introduced the characters that are friends of mine, people that I know, you know, and I think a lot of that emotion kind of went in with the book, you know, and that's what kept me going, is that I can do this because I know what these characters are capable of. And I admit that some of the characters are doing beyond what they probably would do in real life. Like one of my best friends' wife is a hooker, and I wasn't sure how that was going to go over, but she is his ex-wife, so you know. I mean, she would never in a million years do that in real life, but you know, I kind of portrayed her that way, you know, and she was actually okay with it. She was, I think her only comment was, I wish I was making the money that a high price hooker would make. It's like, really, that's your takeaway on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
All
right.
As long as you're happy with it, and you know, if the name's up, I'm sure her name isn't Jeanette in real life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's far from it. So it's like, okay, you know, because I mean, I let my friend know that, you know, just so you know that that's your ex-wife. Oh, okay, cool. That's, you know, so actually his son told his mom what role she played in the book.
Huh.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
So,
you could always deny it.
Yeah, I can always deny it. Well, no, it's just a made-up character, really. You know,
that's not you. I'm just joking. How could that be?
Yeah, really. But actually, since she didn't have a problem with it, I said, "Yep." I decided that I would portray you in a much different light than you really are. And same thing with other characters, you know.
And it's like, no disrespect, but thank you for the inspiration for the character in the book.
Exactly.
So now
I mean, I had fun with it. That's what I did.
You mentioned you were watching TV, and you can't, you know, when you were home during COVID, you can't do that the entire time. Do you ever look at a show on TV, maybe it's got a lot of action, and think to yourself, yeah, I could do better than that in my book?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna
all the time.
Yeah.
I always do that. I actually critique because I love these mystery, you know, like NCIS and these kind of movies or these kind of shows, Blue Bloods. I like these kind of shows because they give me ideas, and I look at these shows, the new shows that they come out. It's like, oh my God, I can so do better than that, you know. And but you know, can I really? You know, I mean, I can't put their plots in my book because it's their plots.
Of course.
You know, but what I can do is I can get ideas from some of these shows that they're, you know, I mean, I would not ever steal a plot from a TV show I watched, but I've gotten ideas of things I can do down the road or in my own book that are just like little excerpts from these shows. That's okay. I can do that.
So you just mentioned Blue Bloods, starring Tom Selleck, and it's a hugely popular show.
Yeah.
I want to center on that for just a second. When you think about that show, what's your takeaway in terms of how the show is constructed, how it moves along? Just like a quick thought. I want to see what you're seeing, you know, in terms of that coming from a writer. Well,
I love Blue Bloods. I think it's a great show, and the plots are outstanding. I like all the characters. I really haven't thought much about what I could do to improve, because I really like the show. I really like what they've done with the show.
Let me clarify. I'm sorry, Larry. Not to improve the show, but your view of the show. It's like, I agree with you. I think the characters are well defined and very likable. I personally think that the situations that they're in are very easy to understand. Like when it gets too deep, I get lost. It's like I can't pay attention. And no lie, sometimes you're sitting there on your phone for a second, you look up, like, all right, I'm following along, and you got it. Um,
Mm.
so it's very concrete, very solid type show.
Yeah.
That's my view of it. I'm
Mhm.
curious if you see
Well,
other things from it.
no, my view is pretty much the same. I think it's a very solid show. I love all the characters. I think they're great in their roles. I mean, they've been doing it for years. I mean, this is like what their 13th or 14th season or something like that. They've been around for a lot of years, and a lot of these characters grew up in this role. A lot of these shows that I like to watch are like that. They grew up in the role, and I look at that, and my view of that is how I view my characters in my book. For example, book one, they're at a certain point, but when they get to book two, they've grown up a bit, especially Trevor, because Trevor's my main character. So Trevor grows up a bit. Now he's more of an experienced FBI agent, but he's still behind the ears. You know, book two, he's not on his own. He's got a mentor. He's got a lead, is how I defined him. A guy named Rob. He is his lead, and he's the one that goes with them to down to Texas, and he basically runs this team of theirs, right? But what it does is I give Trevor an opportunity to grow into that role throughout the second book. First book, he kind of he does a really good job of finishing the book for me and getting me to a certain point. But when he gets into book two, he's more, shall we say, he's more part of the team than the other team members. He's more taking on more of a leadership role in book two than he probably should, because Rob's there, you know. But Rob lets him go, lets him do what he needs to do. He agrees with what Trevor's ideas are, so he just goes ahead and lets him take off with it. And if need be, Rob would pull him back a little bit if he needed to. I see that in Blue Bloods, like with Danny and with Jamie. They're brothers. Jamie's the younger brother. I see Danny pulling him back from time to time because he might go off on a rampage, for example.
Yep.
And Danny will pull him back, like, we're cops. This is not how we do this, you know. And I do the same. I kind of did the same thing with Trevor in book two, because he kind of goes off on a rampage, but it's a good rampage. He goes off into this plot that kind of puts himself in a little bit of danger, and Rob kind of pulls him back a little bit and says, you might want to rethink how you do that, or something to that effect. And so we've got Rob and Trevor working off of each other, bouncing off of each other with ideas on how they're going to do certain things within the storyline. Certain adventures or certain plot twists in the main storyline. And that's important because it kind of gives them both. They're not. Trevor's not abusing his authority, but what he's doing is he's kind of bouncing ideas off of Rob, and Rob is agreeing with most of it. So I didn't want Trevor to take over, because it's not Trevor's team, but I wanted Rob to be okay with that, and Rob was okay with that.
I like the fact that the Trevor and Jason aren't both in the FBI.
Yeah, it does help.
I think it would be different if they both were. There might not be that camera angle of the other character, because they're both kind of doing the same thing. They both understand what it's like to be in the FBI. But then it is kind of cool that one is in security and gets the importance of security in itself. That's what the FBI is.
Exactly. And that I think adds a lot of insights into both characters during the storyline, because you've got Jason, who's an outsider, looking at what Trevor does, and you've got Trevor who's inside the FBI, and I mean, he's green. He's wet behind the ears. He's not. He hasn't been an FBI agent for very long, so he's got to follow the rules that he learned in Quantico, but he's also got these ideas of things that he wants to do with this storyline along the way. And Jason is kind of like the man behind the throne, kind of, sort of, you know. He sits back and he kind of looks at what Trevor's doing, and he kind of lets them know that maybe you should go this direction instead. And he's looking from an outside in perspective, you know. And I think that's why these two characters work so well, because the two characters are from different sides of the fence, so to speak. You know, Trevor has an idea. Trevor is the one that is in the FBI, so Jason really has to follow what Trevor says, but he's also his best friend. So from a friend, he can kind of give Trevor ideas that maybe this is what you should do instead, or maybe we should back off a little bit and not go guns blazing into the situation, you know. And so he's kind of like that voice of reason for Trevor. Trevor's good at what he does. I mean, he went through Quantico. He's a full-fledged FBI agent, so he knows what he's supposed to do. He's got all the rules down, but he's also lets his emotions get the better of him. You know, in chapter 12, in fact, Trevor gets tears running down his face because of a certain thing that happens in chapter 12, something that's pretty dramatic in the as part of this storyline. I'm not going to say what it is, but I will say that it does require a little bit of tissue, because it's kind of like a heartwarming end of that chapter.
Is it something personal to him, or something he experienced?
Something he did, that he did in his role as an FBI agent.
Okay.
And it was pretty monumental for him. Well, for the FBI period, it was pretty monumental. And it brought tears to his eyes when the end of the chapter comes roll around.
Would it be something that I'm not saying this is going to happen, but would it be something that he could receive an award for by the FBI? Oh, okay. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
He just did something in chapter 12. I mean, along with all the other chapters. I mean, when he got to that chapter, the chapter ended with, like I said, a lot of action in this book. All the chapters have action. This chapter was no mystery to that. Lots of action in chapter 12, but when we got to the end of the chapter, there's a monumental ending to that chapter that was perfect, and it brought tears to his eyes.
Sounds like it's something he did the right thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, he did the right thing. You know, he took a chance. You know, that's what Trevor does. He took a chance. He took a shot, and he was victorious. You know, but it goes back to Trevor's the one that does that takes the risks, and up to that point, Trevor was successful in the risks that he took. You know, but you know, he kind of has to, because he's the star of the series. But there are things that happen down the road that aren't so victorious. You know, but you know, Trevor is a great character. I mean, he allows me to give him pretty much a lot of leeway, you know, and in several chapters, I bring him right to the brink of this is too much and pull him right back, you know, just to make sure that he doesn't go too far and get himself killed, you know. So
questions on when you're writing each chapter. Do you have a number in terms of the pages? You say to yourself, all right, there's going to be X amount of pages per chapter, or however, whatever it is.
I have no idea. When I start a chapter, I have no idea how long that chapter is going to be.
So every chapter is going to be way different in terms of the number of pages between. Yeah. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
So I've got chapters in book 3 that are maybe, I don't know, 8-10 pages. and I've got other chapters that are 25 pages. It just depends on what that particular chapter is doing.
Okay.
You know, it just depends on the action that's going on, or how that storyline for that chapter ends. You know, I mean, every chapter has to come to a conclusion, but not a conclusion for the storyline. You gotta come to a point at the end of your chapter where you can start your next chapter off fresh. And that's where it helps when you have like to the question we had earlier, where you have to come to when you come to the end of a chapter, how do you know where to go from there? And you have to know where the end of that chapter is going to go, because the next chapter may not be even part of that storyline. You know, it might be part of a different storyline within the book, you know, and oftentimes that's the way it is. You know, I have to come to a conclusion on this chapter because the next chapter is going to pick up in DC. Or if I'm in DC, the next chapter is going to pick up in Dallas or somewhere in Texas, you know.
So
I mean,
the destination, you just have to make sure the car gets to the destination through the chapter toward the end.
pretty much.
Do you seek to end each chapter on call it a crescendo, a high point, or
No,
where it goes?
not always. Sometimes it just ends with Trevor's thinking about something, and then the chapter just kind of ends. And I look at that when I'm in my mind's eye. I'm looking at that on like the big screen. A lot of what I've done when I'm writing this, especially after I got started writing book 2, I started thinking about how this would be on the big screen, and how the scene would kind of like fade off and a new scene would fade in, you know, and it would be completely different from the previous scene. Same thing, you kind of got to do the same thing in a book. When you get to the end of one chapter, you got to kind of phase your way out of that chapter, or like what I said in chapter 12. Something happens at the end of chapter 12 that kind of brings tears to Trevor's eyes because of something monumental that he did, you know, and the recognition on that chapter that he got from that. And then I can fade into the next chapter. And from there, we go back to Washington, D.C. And something else is happening in Washington, D.C. because chapter 13 is just as action-packed as chapter 12 was. You know, but it's in DC, and it's something else that's going on in DC that has to do with Jason's security business. You know,
All right.
So 13 is a monumental chapter as well, because there's something major that happens in that chapter that really has a climactic ending to that chapter. So it's kind of checks and balances.
Do you go back, or do you ever go back to a chapter and do you say, you know, I should have, maybe after the book's published, I should have done it this way? Does that happen?
I didn't know. Well, when I'm writing the book, yes. Before I send it off to the publisher, I am 100% certain that that's how I want it to go, or I wouldn't send it. Now, when I wrote book 1, this was my first shot at this, you know. And when I went back and read the whole book after I wrote the book, there were a lot of things that changed. You know, most of it was just superficial stuff. I didn't change anything major to the story or the plot, but I made changes superficially that I didn't like when I read through it. You know, and then so what I did was I went through and I read the book after I wrote it. And after I made all these changes, and I went all the way through the book and made whatever changes that I wanted to make, and was satisfied by the time I got to the end of that first read. Then I went back and reread it again and made sure that I still agreed with that, and make sure that there weren't other things. And I actually did that 2 or 3 times before I finally said, you know, this is it. I got it. This is good. And that's what it went to.
I love your dedication to the book in that regard, where you know you got it. I wrote it, and that's the way it's going to be, and I'm not going back to that.
Yeah.
I'm moving forward to the next one, because you can't change it anyway. It's almost like life in general. You can't go back.
Yeah, yeah, you really can't go back. I mean, there's no reset in our personal lives.
Yeah.
You know, what I did yesterday, I can't go back and redo that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in my books, you can't, you know,
Well, until it's published, but
until it's published.
you can also go back and you can. I guess we could do it in life too. You revisit. So book
Yeah.
3, you could go back to, let's say Jeanette, the high price hooker, disappeared, and she could resurface in 3 for whatever reason. But that's life in general. You could have a friend and have lost touch with them or whatever. They could come back.
Yeah. And I can say without giving away any secrets, there are characters in book 1 that are not in book 2, but do appear in book 3. And that's the way I intended it. I mean, when I was writing book 2, I already had book 3 in my mind. While I'm writing because I wanted book 2 to flow into book 3 at some point. The epilogue in book 2 had to flow into book 3. And the only way I could do that was to think about how I wanted book 3 at least to start. And I was very happy with book 2. I got to be honest, I changed very few things when I went back to reread it or to read it for the first time all the way through. My second book, I was very happy with book 2. When I finally read through the whole book once, I did make a couple of superficial changes, but other than that, I was very happy with the storyline in both plots. I was very happy with both of them, and when I got to the end of the book for the first time, I was really happy with what I wrote.
Wow.
But
great feeling. It gotta be so fulfilling.
It was a great feeling to call my publisher after only 6 months and say, well, you ready for book 2? And they were just finishing the editing on book 1.
Wow.
And it took 90 days for them to edit book 1. Now, I will say that I learned a lot from book 1. I learned a lot about how to structure book 2, how to edit book 2 as I'm going along. Things that I missed on book 1 because I had no idea. But they taught me how to edit it on book 1. So book 1 probably went through, I think, 3 or 4 edit phases with the publisher. So I got it back after the first edit. I made a lot of changes. I actually built a spreadsheet with all of the changes that I wanted to make.
Wow.
Yeah, page, lines, everything. Because when they edit the book, what they do is they take your book and they break it down to line by line. So every single line of my book has a number attached to it, a sequential number attached to it. So when you're editing the book, you go in and you put down the page, the line number, and that line number is associated to whatever change you want to make. So what I would do is I would go in and I would retype that line as it was in the book on the spreadsheet, and then I would highlight in red what I wanted to change, and then I would go behind that and put in the change.
Very interesting. I can't believe we're out of time, but we got to
already an hour. Really?
It says right there.
Oh my God.
You're telling me, yeah, we're there. We're actually a little bit over.
Wow. Okay.
No worries. But I find that fascinating that it's line by line, and what a process in the editing. Maybe next time we'll talk about that, because I think that's super cool.
Oh yeah, it was. I didn't know what to expect when we went through the editing process.
Right.
When we did, it was pretty interesting. Yeah, but we went through that at least 3 or 4 times before I finally said, okay, that's good. I think we got it. See, and then you get one more chance after that. So then when I finally say, okay, the editing is good, go with it. Then what they do is they take that book the way it is, they make all the corrections, and then they put it into an actual book format. So then they send that to me. I have one more chance to read through the whole book and make sure that I still agree with it. And if there are any changes, that's basically the last chance I have to make changes to the book before they go to print.
Incident at the Historical Museum and Canyon Spring Wash Murders, the 2 phenomenal books by Larry Deiman. Book 3, Trevor's Revenge. We're working on that. And when do you think, final question here, when do you think that one's going to be done?
Definitely before the end of the year.
Okay. And then plus now you revealed how long it takes to, the edit process as well.
Yeah, that's that. I think that was excruciating. And the publisher even told me, just so you're aware up front, that's the most difficult part of the whole process, because you have to, as a writer, I have to edit every single word of every single line and make sure that I agree with everything.
If only everybody did that when they sent an email.
I know. I know. Thank God for corrections.
Yeah. Larry, it's
Or
always,
autocorrect, I should say.
always great talking to you. Looking forward to the movie in 2023. I'm putting it out there in the universe. That's what I'm doing. Right. That's what you got to do. And go to the website, trevorsadventure.com, to learn more about the books, to learn more about the characters. And
let's order their books from there.
And you can order the books, and they're also on Amazon too. You can search them out as well.
Yep. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, they're all over the place.
Get together next time, and I'm looking forward to it.
You and me both.
All right, thanks a lot. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you can now listen live on the MyTuner Radio and online Radio Box apps for iOS, Android, and the Amazon App Store. Or check us out online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on onlineradiobox.com/US so you don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.